When it comes to superhero movie tie-in games, the two most fondly remembered games have to be Spider-Man 2 and X-Men Origins Wolverine. But the version of those games that are most remembered are the console versions. So I wanted to do something different. I wanted to look at the X-Men Origins Wolverine game on DS and see if it lives up to the console version. X-Men Origins Wolverine the movie is a mixed bag according to the fanbase, and its tie-in game is remembered as being way better. I personally like the movie. FBI, open up! But I understand the disliking towards it. It did a lot of things strangely. It's pretty campy. With a Wolverine game being made by Insomniac, and probably being made a PlayStation exclusive again, just like Spider-Man. Damn it. Wolverine's best game so far is, of course, the X-Men Origins Wolverine game. And although I'm expecting that to change when Insomniac's Wolverine game comes out, X-Men Origins Wolverine has held that title for 12 years. My personal history with the game pretty much started by playing the DS version, although I haven't gotten around to playing the console version. But given X-Men Origins Wolverine the game on console is the topic of discussion when it comes to superhero tie-in games, and since this channel is called Forgotten Games, I'll be talking about the DS version. So with that being said, let's get into it. This review will be both looking at the game and comparing it to the movie and seeing what they did different, or how well they followed the movie. Well, first, the main menu theme kicks ass. Have a listen. If there's something I can praise about the DS games published by Activision, it's that they have great taste in music. And that's the only compliment I'm going to give the company. Bobby Kotick is a scumbag and needs to be removed from his position. So the game when we started up has 5 levels, but don't let that small count deceive you. This is quite a sizable DS game. It took me 3 hours to beat. So I'm betting if you were completely flawless, it would be 2.5 hours long. Keep in mind DS games don't store that much content, unless it's Super Mario 64 DS, but that's a different story. Point is, when we start the game, we see that the game loosely follows the movie, so it's not a strict adaptation of the film. How the story unfolds is completely different. We start with the scene of Wolverine getting the adamantium. The antagonist William Stryker barely resembles the actor who played him in the movie. In fact, I don't think they had the likeness rights, because the characters barely resemble their film counterparts. In line with the movie, Wolverine breaks out and goes on a rampage, killing everyone in sight. This game, as you can probably tell, is a side-scrolling action brawler. At least that's how I would describe it. First, let's talk about combat. The game rather represents playing as Wolverine quite well. You feel like a feral, enraged animal while attacking enemies. Your adamantium claws with the sound effects when you land a hit feel sharp and dangerous. You truly get the impression that you are seriously damaging these nameless enemies. Some of the enemies are oddly designed, like the gunman. I don't know why, but why does his helmet or whatever it's supposed to be look like that? As a non-comic book reader, I can say I'm widely unsure if this game is also derivative of the X-Men comics, but I suspect it is given a lot of things also appear in the X-Men animated series I saw. The enemies are varied well and are fun to fight. Given there's different strategies and attack methods for each enemy, for example, the drone mostly require an aerial attack. Encounters stop you in your tracks as you need to fight waves of enemies to progress, but they are never really dragged out and will be 3 waves at most at a time. We are also allowed to use Feral Rage, which basically does mass damage by dragging your DS pen across the touchscreen. The first level is relatively short. We make it to the barn from the movie, but instead of an elderly couple, we get Agent Zero, who looks nothing like he did in the movie. He looks more like Morpheus in The Matrix than he does the Asian actor in the film. Well, Morpheus offers Wolverine the blue pill or the red pill. Take the blue pill, Wolverine peacefully surrenders and goes back to being worked on by Stryker. But take the red pill, and Wolverine kills whoever stands in his way, until he gets to Strider. Wolverine of course chooses the red pill of rage, and the boss fight ensues. Morpheus is easy to take down, and he knows martial arts too. The trick to defeating him is to free your mind. As we defeat Morpheus, we force him to tell us where Victor is. And with that being said, we make it to the next level, which I think is supposed to be a large warehouse or a military base. I don't know. Anyways, we go across and we come across a brute enemy. While conventional combos worked on regular enemies, in this encounter, well-timed heavy attacks are the method to taking these guys down. This part actually requires you to solve it, and it's not brutally impossible to learn the strategy. So it works. What I usually do is jump around or time heavy attacks before it can land a hit on me. The level is quite long, as the same gameplay loop of enemy encounters happens. The game has a high playability rate, meaning you can go for 2 hours without getting bored or starting to wear out on the game. We encounter Victor, who runs into a helicopter and bombs us, as we're introduced to a real big boy, a rhino mutant dude. This is what I mean when I say the game also derives from the comics. The rhino guy is heavy-handed, but is easily dodgeable if you know what you're doing. So with that being said, heavy attacks or dodging his charge attack will stun him. Just like a lot of the great games, this game has well-paced timing of its enemies throughout the game. We basically find out about a guy called the Blob, referencing, well, you know who if you've seen the movie. The third level is something that never happens in the movie. A prison called the Ultramax, which I'm guessing exists in the comics too, although that's just a guess. This is probably the level with the most amount of new enemies. I know they're supposed to be mutants, but they look like aliens, and I confused them for being so when I was younger. They got really creative with the enemy designs. Like this one brute enemy that fires a rocket, overkill if you ask me. We basically confront the warden of the Ultramax who gives us a key, and then dies. I love how they put the Wilhelm scream there. We make it back to the middle only to find the Blob, who of course is Fred Dukes from the movie. Now the Blob in the movie had an eating disorder and thus that's why he's so overweight. But in the game, his story is altered. Instead of overeating, Stryker made him this way, which of course is really effed up. More so than the movie. That's the one change I like. It would be great if Stryker was more like the Joseph Mengele we saw in the movie, because the most we see him as is, well, we'll get to that. The Blob is probably the toughest boss fight in the game, and that's because he refuses to take damage unless he's stunned. And how do you stun him? You have to dodge his charging attack and hit him while he's down. So with that being said, he runs off and we have to chase after him. I have to say before we go on that the gritty art style and environments does bring a solid dark atmosphere to the game. Well done on that account. Fighting through hordes of enemies, we make it to the Blob again, and it probably takes the longest to beat out of all of them, because he won't lose health unless he's stunned. The Blob, when he defeat him, redirects us to Gambit, which takes us to the next mission, which is probably the longest and the worst one. Like, it's not a bad level, but it's just underwhelming. It might have to do with it being a little too long or drawn out, or maybe it's the music and environment, I don't really know. I just know that there's something off about it. This is the level where we're introduced to the hardest enemy in the game, the Mutant Hunters, which I recognize from the X-Men animated series. So that's something. The Mutant Hunter has more precision than the other enemies, and he does quite a bit of damage too. But that's pretty much the highlight of the level, because we've got Gambit as a boss fight. The cards guy from the X-Men comics. Fast moving is the strategy you'll need to defeat him. He isn't hard per se, but you need fast reflexes to defeat him. It's when we defeat him that the game comes close to resembling the movie again. You see, missions 2, 3, and 4 are all made up and never happens in the movie, but the first and the fifth actually do resemble parts of the movie. The fifth mission is probably the most faithful to the movie, because after fighting past waves of enemies, we come across Stryker, and he ties up and tortures us. Wolverine's lover Kayla, who was essentially a fake-out death, decides to help us, and it's off to fight the last two bosses of the game. First we've got Victor, who is practically the boss battle of the ages. It's the falling elevator sort of fight. He is pretty fast, but he is defeatable. Then we've got Deadpool.
I was always appalled by the blatant sexism in the group's name.
Deadpool is pretty easy. His teleportation ability is never annoying and he is reasonably defeatable. And then Stryker makes Wolverine lose his memories. And that's the end. So as an adaptation after seeing the movie, it's a very loose one, but I don't think it matters. I have heard that the movie was kind of pointless to the whole X-Men film timeline, because Wolverine lost his memories at the end, so his origin story could have been anything. I didn't talk about it much, but there wasn't much of the core game to talk about. But this is a rock solid video game. I remember having fun with this game. I had never seen the movie at the time, and it told the origins of Wolverine pretty effectively. Gripes I have with the game include the character's likeness, the Blob as a boss fight, and perhaps the controls being a bit off. But I played this game on an emulator, so that's my fault. Overall, I give X-Men Origins Wolverine the game on DS an 8 out of 10. According to what I've heard, this game lives up to the console versions of this game. Given the likely rushed development, it's quite impressive what they were able to do. I hope to make this a new sub-series where I talk about Marvel games and the like, and I review them just like I have the Transformers games. So if you have a recommendation for a Marvel game on the DS, leave it in the comments. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories from mystery boxes?